Hello and welcome to another episode of Creating the Curve. So, this is quite a new podcast, and I've got my second guest on, which is a wonderful John Tunstall. And from this session, we're going to be talking about sales. Now, if you're feeling a bit, when I've said that word sales, this is the podcast for you because I know how you feel. A lot of people that I speak to, as soon as I mention the word sales, there's this audible groan in the room. And actually, sales is not something to be scared of. It's a wonderful topic. And particularly for STEM entrepreneurs, you may be feeling it's a bit out of your comfort zone. But that's what this podcast is for. It's to help you with the areas that you find tricky, that you find that you don't want to do, that you're procrastinating on. And so today we've got John Tunstall, who is like my go-to salesperson for all sales knowledge. He's got over 25 years of experience, runs his own business, he's written a book, and he's a founding fellow of the Institute of Sales Professionals. I'm bigging you up here, John. He is When I ever speak to John about sales, it makes me feel so reassured that sales is not something scary and that it is something that we can all embrace. It just needs a bit of a mindset change. So, welcome, John. Do you want to tell everyone a little bit about yourself and the
Thank you.
company and your background?
Good. Thank you, Anna. Nice to be here. My name is John Tunstall. As Anna's already mentioned a few of the things that I've been doing. But before I went into sales, sales were a decision for me. I wanted to get into technical sales because before that, I was an electronics engineer. I used to design test gear for telecommunications equipment. And then I went into sales. I spent a little bit of time in financial services, getting some experience. And then I've worked domestically and internationally over 25, probably more than 25 years, selling everything from a $1 connector to a £25,000 piece of software. So the customer variety that I've dealt with is quite wide. I've dealt directly and I've dealt indirectly. And what I mean by that is I've built business partner networks both here in the UK and internationally across the world, working for some of the largest organizations that there are in the world, some American organizations that I've worked for. So what I do now is to try and change the narrative because, as Anna mentioned there, sales is something that we shouldn't be scared of, and it's something that we should all be doing. We do it every day naturally, so I think we're going to be covering a few specific questions and specific topics over the course of the next 45 minutes or so. Is that
Absolutely.
okay?
And wonderful, wonderful. That is brilliant and a great introduction because what we're talking about with sales is that the people do get this reluctance, don't they? They find it sort of off-putting, challenging. I've particularly found this with STEM founders, probably because maybe their background is what they think is so far removed from sales. It's a doing background, a creating background, and sales to them seems very alien. What do you think are the sort of reasons those sort of founders why do they find it so challenging? What is it? Is it mindset, or is there a skill shortage? What is your feeling behind that?
The If I just go through my own experience from
Mm.
where I came from on the sales side of things, because I mentioned just now that before I went into sales, I was an electronics engineer and designing test gear. What I needed to really understand was the people who had designed the equipment. I needed to know what they were trying to achieve. So I would meet with them. I would find out not only what they were wanting to do with their own piece of equipment, but also what they were trying to deliver for their customers. And I needed to get inside the equipment and inside their thinking behind it to really understand, sometimes right down to component level, what they were trying to do with it. Because if I didn't understand what they were trying to achieve, then I couldn't design a piece of test equipment that would give them the assurances that they were achieving what they needed to achieve with their customers. So really, it was about understanding what they were trying to do. And so I would then design the test equipment, and we would then work through it, and it was basically to solve their problem. When I went into sales, I very quickly realized that the process for selling was precisely the same. It's exactly the same as being in engineering, because the objective is to solve the problem. Of course, what we need to do is to understand from the customer what their problem is. So we need to be asking the right sorts of questions, and we can cover this a little bit in a while, but we need to be asking the right sort of questions to understand what their problem is. The analogy I use, which is not an engineering analogy, but actually a doctor analogy, I believe that salespeople and sellers are the doctors of business. Because when you go to a doctor, you go into the doctor and you say, "Doctor, I've got a pain." And if the doctor was
Yeah.
just to say to you, "Well, here's a prescription, go and take these tablets," what would you think of the doctor? The doctor doesn't do that. The doctor says to you, "Right, where's the pain?" "Well, it's in my leg." "Okay, which leg's it in?" "It's in my left leg." "And it's in the top of the bottom of the leg?" "It's in the top of the leg." "And is it at the front or the back?" "It's at the front." "And what sort of pain is it? Is it a chronic pain or is it a shooting pain?" "Okay, it's a shooting pain." "And how do you feel it? Does it come when you do this or when you move your leg like that?" And all the time they're probing, trying to find out where the pain is so that they can understand two things. First of all, what might be the cause of the pain, and secondly, what the right solution is. It might be to give you some anti-inflammatories, or it might be to send you to a physiotherapist, or whatever it happens to be. But until they've identified the pain, they cannot give you a prescription. A friend of mine, Peter Thompson, he says, he has a great phrase. He says, "Prescription without diagnosis is malpractice." And that's exactly what sales is about understanding what the pain is for the customer and understanding how we can solve that problem, relieve that pain. If we don't know that, how do we understand, how do we know that we've provided a good solution? And that's all sales is about. It's understanding the problem and then diagnosing and prescribing a solution. It's as simple as that.
So it seems like from what you're saying that actually STEM entrepreneurs are really set up really well to actually do sales, but yeah, how can we change that mindset for them to think this isn't for me, and change it to oh, actually yes, I can do this. How do you get that sort of that shift across? Because it sounds absolutely perfect. You've through this, I'm like, when you're saying I can do that. Yeah, I can do that. I'm an ex-programmer. I can work through the problem. It sounds simple, but so it seems like with sales there needs to be a mindset change, maybe on what sales maybe actually is, and the process for doing it. Because when I've spoken to people in the past, they've been to sales conferences and they're given this script, and they have to walk through this script and put on their best salesman voice, or they think of like car salesmen, or those sort of traditional sales roles. How can we sort of shift that mindset, I guess, not just towards them doing sales, but towards the entire sales sector of, and that sort of negativity that it feels when people talk about it.
You're absolutely right that there's a negativity about it, and unfortunately, that's grown up over many, many, many years. Um, just to sort of step back a little bit, because when I first started in sales, which predates the real advent of the internet, um, it was pretty easy to get appointments because what we would do, you had sort of a continuum from transactional sales at one end to transformational sales at the other end. Transactional was you buy it high, sell it cheap. Your transformational one was a really consultative type process. But in the middle, there were a lot of people who would add a little bit of extra value for a little bit of extra money. Um, so sales, getting appointments was really easy because the buyers needed to understand what was on the market. So they needed salespeople to come and educate them with that. But what happened was the internet happened, and then everybody could do their own market research, so they could
Yeah.
understand what was going on. And what's happened is that the sales industry has now become polarized. So you've got a lot of people at one end who are selling the the commodity type items, and you've got a few people at the other end, because those who were in the middle, they either had to go one way or the other. If they went towards the consultative end, then that made it difficult because they didn't have the skills to be able to deal at that level, because there's a lot, it's a lot more demanding. So in terms of changing the attitude towards sales, and particularly towards STEM people, I would say that really what they do every day, which is to innovate, is precisely the same thing that they need to do with their customers. It's about understanding, going back to the point just now, sales STEM people who are innovating, they're saying, well, here's a problem and I really need to solve that problem. So I'm going to come up with
Mm.
some ideas, some products or some ideas and some theories, and then I'm going to test those theories out, and I'm going to see if that works, and then I'll offer something. So it's exactly the same process, but except rather than doing it in their office, they're doing it with their customers. So they're going to their customers and so they're saying, I have an idea here, and it solves this particular problem. And if you have that problem, then I can make your life better. If you, as a salesperson, if you cannot make the customer's life better, then you don't need to be there. That's the whole point about sales. Is if you cannot make their customers' life better professionally, ethically, then we don't need to be there. They just need to. They can
Yeah.
continue to do what they're doing. That's all it's about. It's
Yeah.
about making people's life better. When I've been in situations where something innovative has come onto the market for myself or my team or whatever it happens to be, I've always made sure that we let the relevant customers know that this is available, because it's a dereliction
Yeah.
of duty not to let them know what there is that can make their life better. So it really is all about mindset. It's about how we look at how we're dealing with our customers. Sales is something that you should be doing for your customers, not to your customers.
Yeah. That's it's interesting because I had this conversation the other day, and um, he was almost embarrassed to sell his products, and it was a great product. There was not much else on the market like it. It was very useful, saved the customer a good £1 or £2. There was all these benefits to him. And I said, well, in some ways they should not be grateful for you, but they should be thankful that you've created this product out of almost the goodness of your own heart. You didn't have to create this product, but you wanted to bring it to market because you saw there was a need. And he said, "Oh, I feel bad. I feel like I'm pushing it on, or pushing on, but it's something they need, and it was a real trying to get him over that mindset of almost being embarrassed to tell people about this product that he had that actually is going to be so beneficial. And when they meet people, pretty much 100% of them take it up.
Right. Well, can I just one thing that even salespeople, even professional salespeople, don't seem to get their head around, and that is about establishing what their value proposition is.
Mm,
The days of adding value are historical now. Adding value is something that you get in the supermarket, where they divide something up and they put it together as like the cheeses, for example, where they take all the little
mm,
blocks of cheese. Instead of you buying all different blocks of cheese, they get smaller portions, they wrap them up separately, they put them all together in a little box, and then they charge you 3 times the price. That's the
true.
added value part of it. But what we need to be doing within markets is we need to be creating value. And so, what a lot of people, including professional salespeople, don't do is they don't spend time working out what their value proposition is, what problem they
Mm,
solve, and how it's going to make life better for their customers. If if you or I spend time working out what our value proposition is, then we are very well armed when we go to a customer, and and to be able to present to them and say, this is what it is, this is what it does, and this is how it does it. And yeah, so that's really what it's about: is understanding what your value proposition is. And many organisations and salespeople don't do that.
No, that's really true. And I must admit, a lot of the people I work with don't have one, and we work on it together. In fact, you've given me an idea. I haven't done a value proper. I can't even speak anymore. A value proposition section in my membership area. So that's one of my next pieces. I'm gonna
Okay.
do with a workbook on it, because you're right. It is really essential. Because do you find that when it comes to sales, I find this with marketing. So I'm running a marketing course at the moment at Innovation Centre, and we ended up starting before marketing, because one of the things that I found that people didn't have was a sort of a direction, like that value proposition. They didn't have sort of a mission, values, a vision. They kind of didn't know where they were going. So when it came down to choose doing market research, finding your customers, and even, talking to them, they didn't actually know where they wanted to go,
Hmm.
what their goals were as a company. So with this sort of sales marketing, it almost starts pre that, doesn't it? What is your value? Which direction are you going? What can you bring to the market? What do your customers need? It's all this sort of pre-work before you get there, because
Hmm.
you need to sort of validate where you are, and then that validation almost helps you communicate, doesn't it? Because there's an issue, and you know how to sort of communicate it going forward.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right in that, because what a lot of people do, and this is, and I'll go back to salespeople here in my experience, is what a lot of salespeople do is they just throw things out into the market and think that it applies to everybody. And what we really should be doing is making sure that we're dealing with people who are going to have the problem that our value proposition can solve, that our offering
Mm.
can solve, because so much time and effort. And if you start to look at sales forecasts, especially when you've got sales teams and they put in they have their sales forecast for the next their pipeline forecast for the next 30, 60, 90 days, and you go down and you start looking at all the organizations that are there in their sales forecast, and half of them will never have the problem that our value proposition can solve. So why are we talking to them? If we can't solve their problem, if they don't have the problem that we can solve, we don't need to be there. We're only taking up their time, and we're spending. It's the old Pareto principle, the 80-20 rule. You're going to get 80% of your business from 20% of your customers. So get rid of the other
Yeah,
80%. We don't need to be
yeah,
talking
very
to them,
true.
because another phrase that I have is your marketing is there to drive away the people you're never going to do business with.
Oops.
And that's exactly what it needs to be, is because if we're never going to do business with them, we don't need to take their time up. We need to focus on those people who have the problem that we can solve, and if we can do that, then that's all it is. That's all it's about.
And I think there is a sort of, marketing as well. Like you said, there's this almost, we want to please everyone. As I've got older, I've embraced who I am as a person, which is a little bit quirky, a little bit kooky, and I know that I'm not for everyone. I am interesting and different, but some people don't like red
Mm,
hair and rainbow clothes. So actually, interesting, a mutual friend of John's and I's, Beverly Paul, who is going to be on an episode soon. She said on my website, there's not enough of you. You're not selling yourself enough, because I'd made it too bland to almost try and appeal to everyone. But actually, I want people that want to work with me. I want
mhm,
people that like the sort of fun, colourful people. If you like grey and that, there's other people that will be perfect for you, and but for me, I need people that are going to be able to sort of work with my personality and enjoy my personality,
mhm.
rather than everyone else, because otherwise it's not going to be a successful relationship, is it?
Yeah. Well, here's another little phrase for you: some will, some won't. So what next?
I love that. It's really good. And actually, do you know, the amount of times I've spent my life working on pitches or chasing someone that actually just wasn't a right fit,
Correct.
or because and it is a waste of time, isn't it? And what happens is you then start getting disheartened
Hmm.
with this sort of constant chase of people that actually weren't right for you at all.
That's right. That's absolutely correct. And it does become disheartening. And so we need to find out right up front whether the person and I go through this thing which I call the meet and greet sequence. It's right up front, where we have to find out two things. First of all, whether they have the problem that we are going to be able to solve. And secondly, who within the organization is going to be part of the process for solving that problem. So, because if you're dealing with, particularly in STEM type solutions, if you're dealing with a complex solution, then there's going to be different people within the target organization who are going to look at that problem very, very differently. We call it the DMU, the decision making unit, and we need to understand who is going to form a part of that decision making unit, because
Mm,
the way that the guy who's at board level views their objective within the organization is very different to maybe the end user who's going to be the person using the offering, whatever it is. And then there might be, if it's a technical offering, it may need. And I mentioned that I was involved with software, and there are these people within the organisations. We had our software. We needed to make sure, and they needed to make sure that what we were going to do fitted in with what they were already doing. So for a
mm,
STEM organization, there are different people. The people you need to deal with at the senior level who are going to say, well, how does this impact the business? You've got the technical people who say, is it going to fit with what we're already doing? And you've got the users and the individuals who say, well, how does this impact on me? And the side I was dealing with at the time was, this was really at front end, innovative, real front end technology, and it was technical publications software, and the some of the people who were dealing with it, who we were needing to be involved with this, had been working on drawing boards their whole life. And we were now saying, you need to be able to use a computer to do precisely the same thing that you've
mm.
been doing so successfully on a drawing board. So it impacts them enormously. So we had all these different levels of people who we needed to deal with and make sure that we were understanding what their pain was within the organization, so that we could meet all of their needs. And with complex solutions, which STEM solutions are, then we need to understand all of that and to bring it all together, solve the problems for all of those people. But it always comes down to solving the problem.
It does, and there's many a time where sometimes you don't even think of the impact. For example, once when I was working in accounting software, and the resistance was that the accounting and finance team, some of them thought there was going to be redundancies, and that they would be, they would struggle to do it. So they didn't want to have this accounting software which would have made the whole everything so much easier, their lives easier.
Mm,
But they were really resistant, because they were like, well, we've got this, we'll have this computer, so I'm going to be made redundant, and no one's going to need me, and then I'm going to lose my job. And there's all these sort of psychological things going on in
mhm.
people's lives, because work is, it's where people earn their money. It's, they need security. And I'm guessing part of that sales is almost that reassurance that people aren't going to lose their jobs, that they're going to still be needed and wanted, and actually they're not going to feel out of their depths as well.
Yes. Yes, and that really depends on what the offering is and how that's going to impact. I mean, some of these, we're going back to the software example. Some of the people there was a lot of resistance in that situation. It was precisely the same, but we were able to talk. I'm not aware of anybody losing their role because of the implementation of technology. What they did do, reskill and upskill. So they were able to then become far more attractive in the marketplace should something not go right in the first place. That software was £23,000 for a single license. So they weren't going to invest that for the people and then just shelve them anyway. So it was.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
The thing I was thinking about with all this, because we sort of mentioned people a lot, reassuring people, and in those sales process of talking to people. I think some people's reluctance, particularly if maybe you're a more introverted personality or neurodivergent, is that some people struggle, like business owners or those that are trying to sort of do sales in STEM companies, they struggle to speak to people, and they're worried about how they're going to communicate with them. Is there anything that they can, any advice around that area? Because at some point they will have to talk to someone, and
Mhm.
they may prefer sitting behind a computer or sitting, in a lab doing some engineering, and maybe not, they may have communicated maybe comfortably with a few people on a technical level, but not in this sort of scale. How can they sort of transition maybe their mindset or even their skill set to be able to do that?
I mentioned to you just now about there being three levels to deal with within the organisation. In actual fact, there's a fourth person that we need to deal with within the organisation, and I liken it. I call it game strategy, and the four levels are the head, the board, which is the within take it like a football club. So you've got the board, who are the CEO, and they're always talked about in the background. You've got the players; those are the end users at the bottom, and you've got the backroom staff, who are the technical specialists. But the person that links all of that together is the head coach, the Pep Guardiola of the organisation, and these are people that can move around the organisation, and they have the relationships within the various levels. They're usually a senior level person, but they have the relationships within the organisation. And that fourth level is one that we really need to cultivate when we're bringing our offering to the market. Because what we would like to have is somebody within the organisation who is doing our job for us when we're not there. So,
Yeah.
what an ally, an advocate, who will then take the who is connected to all these various people, but who will then be able to say yes, but somebody who's on your side, who they put your arm around you and say, right, how can we win this together? And if we can cultivate those levels of relationships, then they will then be able to act as a buffer, if you like, within the various relationships within the department, within the organization, the target organization. So when there is a question to be answered, then there's always somebody there who can act as the liaison between the two organizations. It would
Mm.
be really useful if we can cultivate those sorts of relationships. So therefore, nobody at any stage is ever making a cold call. I first learned this many, many years ago. I was on the verge of packing sales in, going back to engineering because of some bad experiences that I had had. And it was at that point that I met my mentor. And I went into one organization. I was trying to get in to an organization, and I was just battering my head against the brick wall. I was using the methodology that had been taught to me from some of these less than desirable sales roles that I had been in previously. And I was just trying to knock on doors and pick up the phone and do all of those horrible things. And then my mentor, I was on the verge of saying, no, I've had enough. I'll give one more sales job. And if that one doesn't work, then I'm off. And I met my mentor, or the man who was to become my mentor. And he showed me a completely different way. And it was this that I'm just advocating now. And what happened was that I had been trying, after a couple of weeks of being at the organisation, he called me in on a Friday afternoon. He said, how are you getting on? And I said, I'm getting absolutely nowhere at all. This is who I'm trying to get into, big organisation. I'm having no joy at all. And he said, right, who are you trying to get to? I said, I'm trying to get to the technical publications manager. And he said, okay. He said, he picked the phone up and he called one of my colleagues. He said, Richard, can you come down to the office? So Richard came down. He said, this is who John's trying to get to. Who do you know in that organisation? And he said, well, this is who I know. And it turned out that I was trying to get in there. The person Richard knew was in a different part of the organisation, but he was two levels above where I was trying to get to. So Richard went off, contacted his colleague, and said, can John come and talk to you? And he said, yeah, let him give me a call. So I gave him a call. He said, yep, come and see me. I went and saw him, and he said, "I like what you have to say." He said, "Here's who you need to speak to," and he introduced me to his colleague over here, who was two levels above where I had been trying to get to. So I
Yeah.
made a he made the introduction. I made an appointment over there and went and saw him. And while I was in that meeting, he called the one I'd been trying to get to into the meeting. And that was an enormous
Brilliant.
education for me because it was so easy then. This guy that I hadn't been able to get to previously, do you think he'd take my call now? Of course he would, because I had been, his boss's boss had told him that he had to. And
Yeah.
the point of that is that we never need to cold call. There's always a route in, providing we're going in with a value proposition that will solve a problem for the client. Then, providing we're doing that, then people will want to deal with us. And so it really all comes back to the change of mindset. I think in it's not something you do to someone; it's something you do for someone. STEM
Mm.
organisations have highly innovative solutions which solve problems, and it's our duty when we have these great solutions. It's our duty to make the market aware of them, in my opinion, because that makes the world a better. That's just my view.
No, I absolutely. No, I 100% agree with you. I see so many work in the industry that I work in. I see so many solutions that I think this is actually really good. It could solve a lot of problems. Everyone needs to know about this, and yet
Mhm.
nobody knows about it. And actually,
Yeah.
it makes me really sad because sometimes you see a company and they will go under and no one has seen their solution and it would have been brilliant and people would have loved it, but it just didn't get in front of the right people. And
Hmm.
it's such a shame. I mean, I love LinkedIn for doing what you were saying about the connections, because for my own business, I'm a small business. I tend to work on who my connections know. So if there's my friends on LinkedIn, what I'll do is I'll go and say, "Oh, I want to meet someone at this industry. Who's a second degree connection? Who knows them?" And so I'll have a look and see if there's anyone that's a second degree connection, and then I'll see who in my network knows them. And if it's someone that I know well, that I know will introduce me, I'll go, "Oh, can you introduce me?"
Hmm.
And I don't think people use that facility on LinkedIn enough, because it's really useful, particularly if you're not working in a big organization that might have contacts. If you're on your own or a couple of you, it's a great way to use your network as that process, in that process of, who do you know, what do you know? Because I found when I've introduced people, and people have introduced me, there's been exactly what you said, that people are more willing to speak to you. They're like,
Hmm.
"Oh yeah, she's all right. So and so knows her." So
Yeah.
it's that sort of, it's almost like a recommendation. An introduction is like a recommendation in many ways.
Yeah. And the when you're getting that recommendation in the first meeting or so, you'll find out if the synergy is there. And then what I always do is if it's clear that there's not going to be any way of moving forward, either because the problem doesn't exist or there is a mismatch of some sort, I always ask them permission to say, well, can I keep you informed, because things change.
Mm.
I've got a great story about that one, in actual fact, because I was in the Netherlands one time. I'd been asked to go over there for a meeting, and during the meeting it became apparent to me that I couldn't achieve what they were trying to achieve. And so I told them that. I said, look, I said, I can get part of the way along to solving your problem, but I can't get the whole way along. And so I think probably I'm going to pull out and say that we're not going to be able to move forward together, but can I keep you informed with things as they change and as we move forward? And they said, absolutely, no problem at all. About 9 months later, I got a telephone call in the office, and it was this guy from the Netherlands. And he said, look, he said, I really appreciated that you didn't try to force something on us that wasn't right for us. But we've seen the information that you've been sending to us, and we think that there's a bit more common area there, commonality. He said, do you mind coming and seeing us again? Well, no problem at all. So I went over there. I was always over there anyway. So I went over there, and they became one of my best customers, and all because I pulled out from previously and didn't try to force something on. If we can't solve the problem, we don't need to be there. So, but we need to make people aware of what's going on, so that when they do have that problem, they go, I know somebody who can solve that for me, and then you're in the picture. So,
Absolutely. Uh, there's a really interesting thing that you talk about quite regularly, mental toughness. I love this term,
mm,
mental toughness, and I really like it. And do you do you think that that's something that STEM entrepreneurs need to build? Because it's sort of different to resilience, isn't it? Maybe describe sort of what it means, and so I love hearing this sort of this. It sounds a great way of sort of almost that mindset change that you were talking about earlier, this sort of mental toughness of being able to sort of um, take control and keep going.
right. Well, if I can go back, I'll give you another story.
Love a
But
story.
a few years ago, I had to take a step back from my sales career for personal reasons. And while I thought, well, what am I going to do? It was actually because we were taking on my disabled father to come and live with us. And I thought, right, what am I going to do with my time while I'm effectively being a carer for in that situation? And what I decided to do in the past, I'd had some phenomenal sales successes. I'd been salesperson of the year. I'd had record level orders. I'd overseen record levels of growth. I'd also had some monumental sales failures, and I'd been fired twice. I jumped on another one before I was pushed. So I'd had this real disparity of performance in certain situations. And I thought, well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to explore and try and find out, research why there's that massive difference, some great performance over here and some abysmal performance over there. And I
Mm,
started looking at various things. I looked at things like emotional intelligence, I looked at personality profiling, some other things as well, and went and did the courses on all these things, but they weren't giving me the answer. And then for some reason, things started appearing about mental toughness in my inbox. Maybe it was because I was doing some personal development stuff. I don't know. But that then sort of ticked a box for me. I thought, well, that's interesting. And it was coming from an American guy. And but the problem with the Americans in their sort of rah rah and yeehaw and go get 'em Floyd. Um, and I thought that's great, but I could really buy into it, but I'm not sure the UK market would be quite ready for that. So I researched in the UK, and what I came across was the research by a guy called Professor Peter Clough, who was head of psychology at the University of Hull, later Manchester Metropolitan University. And what they've done is they've developed a psychometric which measures mental toughness. Now, the difference between mental toughness, we need to really understand what mental toughness is, but before that, we need to understand what it isn't. And what it isn't, it isn't about being macho tough. It isn't about standing toe to toe, nose to nose. It's about your own performance and being able to control your own performance and understanding and being aware of how you are performing. The difference between the other tools that I've been researching and mental toughness is that the other tools tell you how you act. Mental toughness tells you how you think and why you think that way at an emotional level. And this is really critical when we're dealing with sales, because nobody buys what something is. They will only buy what it does for them. All buying decisions at some level are an emotional decision.
mm,
So what we need to do, I have this thing called EDGE, which stands for people need to either esteem more, do more, gain more, or enjoy more. Reason leads to conclusions, but emotion leads to action. So I started to research this, and what I found was that it applied perfectly to the sales environment for salespeople specifically, because the way that it's set up, there is a four C's and the eight factors. The four C's are control, commitment, challenge, and confidence, and then they each divide down into additional factors, which then we can. There's a psychometric which can then tell us how somebody is thinking, and we can then work because there's over 40,000 variations of the different factors, and so what's right for one person isn't right for somebody else. It taught me how people think, and the reason that was relevant was because when I looked then back at my successes and my failures, I found that I was being um, heavily influenced from external forces. So when I had a great boss, when I had my mentor there, I was performing so well. We were we were so successful. And then what happened was that the company had a new managing director, got a new, actually, yeah,
Mm.
new managing director. My boss, whose coattails I had held on to as he got promoted through the organisation, so he dragged me up behind him. Um, but then a new managing director came on board, wanted to bring his own guy in. He fired my boss and brought in his own guy who I had a real personality conflict with. I lasted about 6 months and I was gone. And as far as I'm concerned, as far as I'm concerned, that's one of my failures. I wasn't fired and I didn't jump before I was pushed, but I just couldn't work there with the guy. It failed. As far as I was concerned, it was a real failure. So within the same organisation and the same product offering, um, I had gone from total success to total failure. And the reason
Mm.
was because of the external influences of that were on me and how I was responding to them, how I was thinking, how I was responding at an emotional level. And that's what mental toughness is about. So I've learned about that. I've learned how to deal with that. Mental toughness is a personality trait, which means we all have it. And the opposite of
Mm.
mental toughness is not mental weakness, it's mental sensitivity. And the world needs both the mentally tough and the mentally sensitive. If the world was full of mentally tough people, we'd all be like that. So we need the mentally sensitive people to pull back and say, "Whoa, are you aware of what it is that you're doing?" And
Mm.
this was enormously important to me. What I realised was that it's the mindset. It was my mindset that was causing being influenced externally by my mentor was making me feel great, but then also being influenced externally by the guy who replaced him, which made me feel awful. And I reacted to that. Instead of being focused on the objectives, I became focused on the person and the situation and everything. Oh, and by the way, they'd fired my mentor, so I didn't like that anyway. So there were all these things that were going on, and so what I've done now is I've developed a thing which I call the foundation and the three pillars. So the foundation is mindset. Um,
Yeah.
if you think about it, our outcomes are caused by our behaviors. I'm thinking specifically about sales situations here, the results are caused because of our actions, but our actions are caused by the way we think, and the way
Mm.
we think is caused by what we believe. Now, most interventions deal with actions. They say this is how a person's acting, so this is how we deal with it. A lot of situations where somebody isn't performing in sales and they say, well, let's give them some more training. Well, no, that might have a little bit of an impact, but only temporarily. And then they'll go back to what they were before, because what we haven't done is we haven't changed the fundamentals that are driving the behavior. And that's what we need to do. So we need to understand
Yeah.
what it is that they think. Beliefs, beliefs create behaviors, behaviors create results. It's as simple as that. And mental toughness is about working on the beliefs and the thinking and that sort of thing so that we can then drive what believes them. That gives you sustainable change. Whereas working on the
Mm.
behaviors might give you temporary change, working on the mental toughness and the thinking gives you sustainable change, which can then be um, applied going forward. So
I was just going to say, do you know what, this is resonating so much with some of the conversations I've had recently, because we people are trying to change their behaviors, but they are there's this sort of resistance, and they only last about 2 or 3 weeks.
Mm.
And then, you know, we've been doing a lot of marketing, and they start doing their marketing for about 2 weeks. And like, oh, I'm doing really well, and then it just stops. It falls
Mm.
off a cliff. So this really makes sense here because you know, this behaviour that I've seen, it's someone almost said like you can't. I can't remember who it was that said that you can't motivate yourself to do something you don't like, you know,
Yeah.
because you're never gonna enjoy it. But this sort of mental toughness, I know people use about resilience. There's this discipline, you know, sort of terms that people use. It's this being able to do things, like you said, and change it at your very core, because you're not gonna. And I hate doing my accounts. I'm never going to motivate myself to do my accounts. I hate them, but I need to change it more at my core of probably my
Mm.
beliefs of how important it is, and how you know, how much I need to do it, rather than just trying to motivate myself once a year to try and do it, which actually
That's
just
right.
doesn't work.
Yeah. You cannot consistently be who you're not.
Yeah,
That's
absolutely. I really like this. Do you think also it applies to STEM entrepreneurs, not just in sales, but this sounds like it's something that could apply in business as well? Because, you know, a business is tough and you need a bit of um, potentially mental toughness, because you know, you're talking about getting that influence by the sort of factors outside. You know, if customers aren't buying from you, if you know, if someone says gives you a bad review, if someone, you know,
Mhm.
something negative, you know, I've seen business owners suddenly start spiraling down. I'm going to close my business. I'm not, it's not worth doing anymore. It
Mhm.
feels like this is something they could probably do with generally as well as a business owner, to help with the riding the storm.
Well, the sales part of it is what I've applied to it. The research originated from sport, in actual fact,
Right.
because and by the way, just as well as the four C's and the eight factors you mentioned about resilience. Resilience is a part of mental toughness. It's a component of mental
Mm.
toughness. Resilience enables you to take the knocks, but it's only when you develop the positivity, which is the other key component of mental toughness, it's only then that you can then start to move forward. And that's the difference between resilience and mental toughness. In terms of how it's applied, the people, I've been really lucky because when I found all of this out about the research in the UK, I got in touch with the people who are driving this research, and I've been very lucky to work very closely with the people who administer the psychometrics. It's been an absolute education, and the originated in sport, but it's applied in things like the NHS. It's applied to the police. Have been large. Military have used this sort of thing. It's
Mm.
really, if I give you the definition is that mental toughness is a personality trait which describes in large part how people deal with stresses, pressure, and challenge irrespective of prevailing circumstances. And there are three components to that. The first component is that it's a personality trait, which means we all have it. It's either to a greater or a more sensitive degree. We all it's a personality trait. In large part means that it's significant, but it's not the whole picture. To give you an example, in performance, the performance element of mental toughness, it accounts for about 25% of the variation in performance. Developing mental toughness accounts for 25% of the variation in performance. Now, with all the personality traits that we have, for one, to have that amount of impact is very significant.
It's huge.
Other benefits include things like well-being, mental agility, dealing with difficult situations, people, applying the very issues that you have been mentioning about the reticence of STEM entrepreneurs or STEM businesses. It covers all of that sort of thing. And the third part is irrespective of prevailing circumstances, which means, as I found out, I was being heavily influenced by external circumstances. And where it says irrespective of prevailing circumstances means you hold your hands up and you say, it was my decision, I made it, I'm responsible. And so those are the three key elements, in large part, personality trait and taking responsibility. The three pillars, I mentioned to you earlier about the three pillars, the foundation is mindset, mental toughness. The three pillars. The first one is solve the problem, which we've already
Mm,
spoken about. The second one is about understanding the why, which is the the reason, the emotional decision making, and the third one is taking responsibility, being
mm.
taking responsibility for where you are. So that's it. Really, all applies. Those are the three pillars and built on the foundation. Those are the success. How to be successful in sales.
Fantastic. So from the people listening today, is there anything like is there a sort of first step that you would suggest they take? You know, that you've got these people resistant to sales, you know, founders resistance to sales, and they kind of just want a nudge in the right direction. Where do you suggest they go first? What is there sort of resource or a step that they can take that you'd suggest?
Well, there's in terms of resource. I mean, if they're bothered about the processes, which they shouldn't be. I mean, everybody sells every day. And an example I use is: have you ever applied for a job? Have you ever been employed by anybody? Because if you have,
Yeah,
you already know the sales process. You identified an opportunity, you matched your skills to what the opportunity was. You wrote out a nice letter or some sort of application. You went along, you made a presentation. You then secured the position, and you went and did the job. So everybody knows how to sell. We all sell every day, but when you give it a mobile phone and a company car, they seem to sort of the barriers go up. People turn into idiots, and that's what happens. So the first thing is, I would say, in terms of resource, about 18 months ago, I was asked to put together for the ISP, the Institute of Sales Professionals, a workshop, and a version of that workshop was put online, and it's free. And I can let you have the link for that if you want it. It's on the Innovation
perfect.
South.
I'll put that in the show notes. Yeah,
Right.
definitely.
It's on the Innovation South virtual campus, and that's a sort of cut down version. You get a little certificate at the end. It tells you the processes, but so there's a resource. It's free anyway. Um, in terms of mindset, change from trying to sell somebody not to what you get, but to what you give. Solve the problem, decide on your value proposition, and solve the problem. And in terms of a tip, I would say whenever you're going out to see a potential customer, ask yourself this one question, and it's this: how do I want my customer to think, feel, and act as a result of dealing with me? That's all it is. How do I want my customer
Brilliant.
to think, feel, and act as a result of dealing with me? How do I want to change for the better my customer's situation? And if we can answer that, then we know what our value proposition is, and we know why we're going to talk to somebody. And when we get there, we know that what we're doing is going to be good for them, leave them in a better place, professionally and ethically. So there's my tip.
Fantastic.
And
That is a brilliant tip.
as my mentor used to say, that'll be 7 guineas.
Fantastic. I'll pay you later, John. I'll pay you later. Fantastic. So thank you so much, John, for coming on today. How can if people want to follow up with you, you know, find out more about how you can help them, how can they get in contact with you? Where can they go?
My organisation is called Intelligent Sales Solutions. The reason I called it that was because sales hadn't changed for 150 years. People are always still using the same processes, but it's changed in the 21st century. So we need to change the way we sell, because buyers have changed the way they buy. So we've needed to change the way we sell. Most people are still using these 150-year-old techniques, but the website is intelligentsalesuk.com. And if you send an email to info@intelligentsalesuk.com, then that'll get to me.
Fantastic. And if anyone wants to get in contact with me, I'm always hovering around LinkedIn, Anna Bravington on there, only one that exists, or creatingthecurve.co.uk website. And obviously you can come and listen to some more episodes in the future, or have a listen to some past ones. So thank you, John, so much for coming today. That was really knowledgeable. I feel much more confident about sales. It is that change of mindset. And sometimes,
Mm.
I'm an ex-marketeer, but even I sometimes need to change my mindset about that sales, because I think I've been to too many sales conferences where they've handed me a script and I've been sent away to try and read it. And this is
Yeah.
a really much more comfortable, effective way of looking at sales. So
Yeah.
it's been brilliant. Thank you for coming today.
Pleasure. Pleasure. Thank you for the invite.
So yeah, I think all of our listeners are going to go away, skip away, going, I can do sales now, because you can
Yes,
do sales. You can all do
you
sales.
can. Yep.
As John said, you're doing it already. You just
Yep.
don't know it every
Yep.
single day. So thank you everyone for listening, and I'll see you on the next episode. And thank you for this coming to the episode of Creating the Curve. Goodbye.